Good morning, Intenders.
Good morning.
Welcome and welcome back to Morning Intentions. Today is Wednesday, May 13th. Thank you for joining us for this month of living a heart-led life. And Annette, to recap a tidge of what you brought up yesterday that you wanted to bring to the table and to the podcast. For the last year or so, but more currently than any other time, you've been focusing on the concepts of attachment, detachment, and non-attachment, right?
Correct.
I wanted to make sure we connect this with what does this have to do with living a heart-led life? First of all, if we're overly attached to a situation or we're completely detached, this is what we were talking about last week when we were talking about fear-led living. What does fear-led living look like and sound like? If we're so attached that it has to be a certain way, that's complete fear. And the opposite of attachment and detachment, where we just say, I don't care. I don't care what happens. I don't care. That was a common refrain in my life. Oh, I don't care. And my dear sweet mother would say, you've got to care. You've got to care. And then I'd say, I don't.
Oh, and the looks you would give me when I would say, Ada, you have to care.
I had no capacity for care. And that's where those looks came from. And I'm sticking with that story. But really, that's the truth. I had no capacity to care. So I would just say, I don't care. I don't care what happens. Those were all fear-led times.
Do you see now in hindsight where when you were saying, I don't care, and I would say, but you have to care, but I don't. Can you feel the fear from which you were coming?
Of course. That's so easy to see. And nowadays, if I ever hear someone, even you, anyone from a client from you, anybody who starts talking like they don't care, I say, no, you gotta care. I get why you have to care. Caring matters and it helps you show up from a better space each and every situation that you're in. But we can't care so much about the outcome. And that's where non-attachment comes in. And that's how we truly can be heart-led in our lives. We can live from a heart-led space. Because when we're coming from that space of non-attachment, we're actually looking within to our hearts and who we are and how we showed up each and every day. And that becomes more important than how a specific situation turned out, because we can always look back and say, I tried my best, I gave it my all, I showed up as the best person I could be, as that best version of myself. If it didn't work out, I might be bummed, but I'm not going to lose who I am because the situation didn't turn out how I hoped it would be. I know I turned out how I hoped to be, and that's what matters most. So Annette, did you have anything more that you wanted to share? It really sounded like you did at the end of yesterday.
Oh, no, I do. I was just getting started, actually.
You're just getting started? Okay.
Okay,
We'll
so
sit down and tune in.
First of all, you brought up the word outcomes. I always judged myself and others, have to admit, and others by the outcome. So if I tried very hard, and I'm not sharing this so that everybody knows about me, I'm sure I'm not the only person in the world that's had this experience, because I know I'm not, because as a coach, you hear this over and over and over again. But I'm no different. I'm going to share my experience, but I'm hoping we can all learn from this. So let's say I had a relationship. Let's say it's a friendship. I would give my all to the friendship, meaning I would try to be thoughtful. I would send cards. I would call on special days. I would do all the things that, in my mind, constituted being a good friend. If I was not met with the same sort of what I would say as care or commitment, not like they had to be calling me every day, but there was no reciprocity, then what I then would do would say, well, there must be something wrong with me.
They would have shown up with whatever you thought they should do if you were a good enough person.
Right. So I actually did have one friendship where we would make plans and then the person would say, "Oh, I forgot about the plan. Oh, sorry, I spaced it out. I took a nap." Or, "Oh, something else came up. I'm going to do that instead." So when that happened,
You wouldn't just say rude?
no,
You wouldn't
no.
just say, "Wow, how rude to
Well,
do that."
of course, I eventually got there. But for me, the first thing I did is, what's wrong with me? Why would they forget about it and take a nap instead when I was planning my whole day around it? In fact, I probably planned part of my week around it to make sure that I was available and well rested and I was going to be with that person. The first thing that we do with attachment can be that we judge ourselves. Like, what's wrong with us? If we had a better personality, they wouldn't choose a nap over us. If we were more fun, they wouldn't plan something with somebody else. Somebody else comes along and they're just going to leave us. We think about all of that. And so we first go into judgment about ourselves. And then only if we think about it long enough or we're willing not to be so hard on ourselves, we can also be judgmental about the other person. We can say, well, that person, I hate that person. We hear this. I hate that person.
Maybe I'm a little different than you. Maybe I'm built different.
But you go straight into, well, the other person's completely rude. But that's really not what happens when you're completely attached. Because when you're coming from that attachment place, it's more about like, why is this turning out the way it's turning out? Oh, it's turning out the way it's turning out because of me.
I would always think that if I wanted it to turn out a certain way, there are times, that I maybe not have shown up as the best version of myself. And I could look at the situation and say, I should have done it different, or I could have said something different. And then there's also times where I wanted it to turn out a certain way, and the other person wasn't the best version of themselves. And I could point my finger and say, well, if they didn't do what they did, it would have been fine.
That's an example of not being completely coming from this very attached place.
I always just thought attachment was there was this outcome I'm looking for. And if it didn't happen, there was someone to blame. It could be me, it could be someone else, but there was a reason and I'm ticked about it.
Well, technically, I think you're right. Technically, I think you're right about that. But I do want to share that the most common way that attachment shows up is we attack ourselves. And we say, why didn't I work harder? Why wasn't I this? Why wasn't I not enough? Why wasn't I smarter? And that's where we can get into a lot of shame, a lot of false guilt, and we can stay stuck there. But then what happens is if we do that enough and we allow ourselves to go to the place of hate and stay there, then we can get into the detachment. I don't give a damn. And then we go through life not giving a damn. I don't care. That's equally unhealthy because then we're not involved and we're not intentional about life. We just don't care. So the sweet spot is non-attachment. You're not going into judgment about you, yourself, how you showed up, or truly the other person. But you're also not coming from a space of, I don't care. Non-attachment is what I want to share tomorrow.
Well, you are blowing my mind right now. I have so much to say, but we are out of time. But I'll start tomorrow before we get into more of non-attachment because my mind is blown.
Okay.
So much is going on. And
that's why I love this podcast.
Well, we'll talk about that tomorrow, how my mind got blown. But for today, our intention is a reflection question. What are my experiences with attachment and detachment? What are my experiences with attachment and detachment? Thank you so much for joining us today. Our day is better because you are part of our day. See you tomorrow.
See you then.